Today's headlines. Hamlin Fistula Center in Mekelle says it's no longer able to provide medical care to its patients due to the siege on Tigray. UN Human Rights Council adopts a resolution to establish an international commission that will conduct investigations into gross violation of human rights in Ethiopia. An airstrike in Alamata on Friday kills 10 civilians and injures several more. Hello and welcome to those of you watching live on satellite television as well as on our social media platforms, Facebook and YouTube. I'm Sablork Lamma and I'm here with the English news for the evening. The systematic destruction of health facilities in addition to the 6-month-long siege on Tigray has blocked off banking services as well as all medical supplies coming into the region, has devastated pregnant women and children in Tigray. Now, Hamlin Fistula Center, one of its kind health facility in Tigray, says it's no longer able to provide treatment for its patients due to a lack of medical supplies and banking services. We have more on that. The destruction of almost 80% of health facilities in Tigray has resulted in the complete collapse of Tigray's healthcare system, grossly affecting the health and well-being of women and children across the state. Unable to gain access to healthcare, pregnant women across Tigray have been forced to go through labor without proper medical follow-up. This has led to a higher rate of obstetric fistula cases in Tigray, caused due to the prolonged labor. The condition makes it difficult for women to control their bowel movement.
I wasn't receiving medical treatment for obstetric fistula because I wasn't able to get medical treatment in time. I went into labor on May 25. We went to the health center, but there were enemy soldiers there. So my family went to the medic's house and called him to my home. After he saw me, he told me he couldn't do anything since roads were blocked. We went back to the clinic where the enemy soldiers were and begged. I was in labor and in a lot of pain. Then on the third day, my baby died inside of me.
The Hamlin Fistula Center is the only health facility in Tigray primarily dedicated to the treatment of fistula cases in Tigray. But the almost 6-month-long siege on Tigray has made it impossible for patients to receive proper medical care.
Before the start of the siege, we used to have better food options. We used to eat 6 times a day. However, that has now completely stopped. There is shortage of basics such as food and medical supplies.
Dr. Malaku Abraha is a medical director at the center. He says that Mekelle Hamlin Fistula Center has been giving services since 2006 and has so far cared for 4,500 women from different parts of Ethiopia, but is now being forced to discontinue its services due to the siege.
And so far we did for 4,500 women. And we return them with their dignity, and out of this, around 500 pelvic organ prolapse, which has got the same socio-demographic background. They are very poor. They cannot cover their transport and bill in the medical service. So, and if you see by distribution, around 25% of patients in previous time, before 2019, are from outside the region, and namely from Amhara, Afar, and even Eritrea. The second appeal to the media is quite different from the previous one. Now we are totally out of function because the main pillar for this service is just to sustain the staff. They should get some salary because it's a heavy tax. It needs a compassionate care.
He also added that the health facility has been operating at a lower capacity, with the amount of money invested on a single patient reduced by over 50%.
2019, the cost of per patient was $1,100. But now in 2021, it has to be escalated because of the anything is increasing in cost. But now we treat it with 350 to 530 USD dollar. So it has reduced by 50% the cost. But the cost, you should not celebrate it because we have reduced some services on this woman. We are feeding them very well. We are buying good items for them. So this war has brought us, and the lack of communication also brought us to reduce the amount of money we spend on our patient, and that will definitely reflect on quality of care. And the success is also reduced from 92% with a single surgery. Now it has reached to 88%. So the disease is so severe, and the investment is also very low. We expect to increase in investment in order to improve the quality of care. And then the previous time we were giving a good service for this woman. Now because of this war, we are devoiding some services because we have to do it in order to treat them. So that's not a good sign. Whenever you reduce the cost per patient, the donors will be very happy, but it is at the expense of the quality of care on our patient.
Dr. Melaku asked the international community in the diaspora to play part to ensure that assist the center so it can continue to provide healthcare for its patients.
And particularly our Mekelle Hospital, Mekelle Fistula Center is supported by Australian government. So Tigrayans living in Australia and the fundraising office in Australia, and being the founder of this fistula in Ethiopia is Dr. Catherine Hamlin, who is an Australian. And they have invested a lot for the last 16 years for Ethiopian and 15 years for Tigray Mekelle Hamlin Fistula Center. So the dream of Dr. Hamlin is not to close the Fistula Center. So we have to continue her legacy just by supporting us. So they can use the TDA fund, and we can get it from the debit microfinance. This is the only outlet we do have to continue our job. And we see also people here are using it. And the other thing is the people living in the Tigray and in Ethiopia, even people working in the Fistula Center, they have to support this society.
The UN's Human Rights Council held a special session on Friday regarding the gross violation of human rights in Ethiopia. The special session concluded with the adoption of a resolution entitled Situation of Human Rights in Ethiopia that establishes an international commission to conduct an investigation into human rights violation in Ethiopia. Fanuel Lemuru has more.
On Friday, the United Nations Human Rights Council held its 33rd special session on the gross violation of human rights in Ethiopia. The Council discussed and passed Resolution A/HRC/S33/L1, which called for the formation of a new international investigative team composed of 3 human rights experts, all appointed by the President of the United Nations Human Rights Council to report on rights abuses and violations in Ethiopia starting from November 3, 2020. The Council adopted the resolution with 21 states in favor and 11 in abstention. 15 states voted against the resolution, including Eritrea, who is a party to the conflict and whose forces have committed numerous atrocities, including the Aksum massacre that saw the killings of hundreds of Tigrayans during the Aksum Zion festival. In a clear rejection of the findings of the joint investigation by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the Higher Commissioner for Human Rights, the resolution states that a new investigation covering the entirety of the conflict was essential to ensure that such investigations complies with international standards, including with respect to transparency, while also addressing issues of command responsibility in order to address impunity in a meaningful way. The resolution also called for an immediate end to all atrocities committed on civilians on the basis of their identity. The representative for Slovenia presented the resolution on behalf of the European Union.
The resolution about the respect of human rights and fundamental values that we should all share and defend. In light of the prolonged conflict situation and given the seriousness of the allegations, it is clear to us that the international community has to assume its responsibilities and that this Council has to fulfill its mandated role including with regard to prevention.
While the Ethiopian government has repeatedly called for international bodies to investigate atrocities in Afar and the Amhara region, they have continued to deny the same rights to Tigrayan victims of atrocities by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces.
We urge all in this regard to refrain from making political statements before a Human Rights Council. Let us also once again underline that we do not see any merit in this politically motivated draft resolution.
Nada Al-Nashif, Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, said that more than 400,000 people in Tigray are experiencing famine-like conditions, with 90% of the Tigrayan population in need of humanitarian assistance. The Deputy United Nations Rights Chief also noted that the recently declared state of emergency has led to arbitrary detention of thousands of civilians based on their identity, and urged the government of Ethiopia to deliver fair and independent proceedings that address the full range of violations identified.
The nationwide state of emergency announced on 2 November is leading to significant human rights concerns on a very broad scale. Notably, the state of emergency authorizes the arrest, search, and detention of anyone suspected of supporting the Tigray People's Liberation Front and the Oroma Liberation Army, designated terrorist groups in May 2021. This excessively broad provision has led to mass arrests and detentions of thousands of Ethiopians, including United Nations staff, and according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, at least 14 journalists. Most of those arrested are ethnic Tigrayans.
The resolution adopted by the United Nations Human Rights Council calls for all parties to grant an unhindered access to the members of the International Commission of Human Rights experts in Ethiopia to visit sites and to meet and speak freely and privately with whomever they wish to meet or speak with. On Saturday, the government of Tigray issues a statement welcoming the adoption of the United Nations Human Rights Council resolution on the situation of human rights in Ethiopia. In this statement, the government of Tigray expressed that it understood the need of engagement with investigators and said that it was establishing a high-level task force with full authority to manage all cooperations on this matter and remain steadfast to engage the international community.
And now we will have a brief stay with Abiy Alqaba, an associate professor in the international law at Maqale University. Abiy, thank you so much for your time. The United Nations Human Rights Council held a meeting on Friday to discuss the gross violation of human rights in Ethiopia, and the Council passed a resolution entitled "Situation of Human Rights" in Ethiopia, which is A/HRC/S33/L1, that called for the establishment of international investigative team. Do you believe this was necessitated because parties of the conflict rejected the outcomes of the investigation, of the joint investigation?
I think there were some reasons before convening of this special session. It was very clear for everyone to see. There was a persistence objection on the entire process, including the involvement of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. As it's an organ, basically its head appointed by the Prime Minister, which this organ itself, the Prime Minister and his governments are one of the parties to this conflict. So from day one, there was a persistent objection on the involvement of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. And you can see this from the resolution where it calls upon the governments of Tigray, also another party to this conflict, on the government of Eritrea, to acknowledge, which didn't happen because not only when the release was, the report was released, even during the establishment of the joint committee of the UN Human Rights Commission and the Ethiopian Human Rights joint investigation. So I think there is a belief, which was shared by members of the international community, that the international standard of conducting human rights violations had been compromised. So there must be a need to rectify these elements. Second, I think it's also evident from the resolution that the report itself did not meet an international standard. Of course, it gives due credit for the joint investigation for their efforts in conducting the initial, in producing the initial reports. But since the international standard of these reports, which was produced by the joint team, was cushioned by the very parties that are expected to implement. And you can see that there were some major obstacles if there is going to be any remedial or accountability or prosecution. It asks the cooperation of all parties to the conflicts. Well, since the involvement and legitimacy of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission is itself in question, I think this is one of the reasons why the international community, more specifically the International Human Rights Commission, established an International Commission of Human Rights in Ethiopia with the same mandates, also covering the same period of time. I think it's very important to mention here that here, since the scope of the conflict has widened, the study area is not only confined to Tigray. So Amhara and Afar, also Oromia is included. So it is not a very narrow scope as was first envisaged in the Joint Investigation Commission. So it sees the wider perspective of human rights violations, not only confine itself to northern Ethiopia, but ongoing human rights violations in Oromia, for instance, was not brought to the attention of the international community, was not given due attention, as the international community was very much focused on the conflict in northern Ethiopia. So still other parties to the conflict other than the conflicting parties in northern Ethiopia has also rejected the involvement of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. So the credibility of Ethiopian Human Rights Commission in providing the due remedy for victims and survivors cannot be ensured with the involvement of the Ethiopian Human Rights, and the international community has come to understand this.
While many had their reservation about the joint investigation between the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the UN, it may have been possible that UN would have only had access to Tigray through cooperating with the state-appointed Human Rights Commission. What exactly will be the effects of the resolution passing at the UN Human Rights Commission, and can it compel Ethiopia to cooperate with its investigators?
Well, basically, we would expect that all the parties to the conflict would accept the resolution, also express their willingness to cooperate with this International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia. Well, the Abiy Ahmed government has, from even before passing of this resolution, commenting only on the draft, has rejected. So one of the major obstacles that this International Human Rights Commission can face is non-cooperation on part of the Ethiopian states, which is led by Abiy Ahmed governments. And still, it has expressed its concerns through the resolution, and it calls upon all the parties to cooperate, to have what you call allow to visit all places without any hindrance, to speak with whoever they want freely, and all the parties to this conflict under their territory should allow for this international panel of experts to carry out their activities. But there might be a possibility of non-cooperation, even not inviting these international human rights experts into Ethiopia. So I think that will be a much difficult challenge for any future works by the International Commission of Human Rights Experts. But this does not necessarily mean that the work will not be carried out. There are other alternative means where the Commission can work out even without the cooperation of the Ethiopian states.
The resolution still requires that the future investigation of human rights violation in Ethiopia to be built upon the joint investigation between Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the UN. Do you believe this may negatively affect the outcomes of this investigation and overall the road to justice for the people of Tigray?
Yeah, I think there are acknowledgements within the resolution itself where the joint investigation first itself acknowledges that starting of the conflict according to the report on 3rd November 2020 till June 28th. Well, there were many unvisited areas due to different reasons provided by the joint committee reports. And there were developments. We had, for instance, a state of emergency where there is a new wave of arrests based on ethnicity, and this was not covered by the initial reports. And also the rights of these internally displaced people, especially this new wave of arbitrary displacement from Western Tigray, was not given due attention. And also, as I have stated, the government of Ethiopia, according to the report, at least had its own reservations with the finding of the report itself. So I think what really matters is, as such, how the research is conducted. Well, one of the points, for instance, raised in the resolution is the former report fails to establish the issue of common responsibility, for instance. So, in such instances, it's possible that justice can be delivered, but it's, as you can see, it's going to be a fresh research from scratch. As such, it may not negatively affect, and the International Commission of Human Rights Experts should be careful relying on these reports, as the report itself had been rejected by the parties to the conflict, also by the victims in Tigray, where there is overwhelming rejection, even distress of the involvement of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. So we expect that the panel of experts would start a fresh research from scratch, having different, not only the previous mandates, but also having additional mandates, additional atrocities, additional crimes committed. So I think we can at least rely on the International Commission of Human Rights Expertise.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
The aerial bombardments of towns and cities in Tigray has continued with another round of airstrikes in Alamata on Friday. The most recent airstrike targeted a hotel in Alamata, killing 10 civilians and injuring several more. The southern town was hit by 6 rounds of airstrikes on Thursday, resulting in the death of 28 civilians, including children and elderly. This brings the total number to to 38 killed in just 2 days. Bethlehem Ayala has more on that.
In the past year of the conflict, towns and cities across Tigray have been devastated by indiscriminate airstrikes that have killed hundreds and injured several more. The most recent airstrike have targeted the town of Alamata, just 159 kilometers from Ma'ala. For 2 consecutive days, the Ethiopian Air Force has bombarded the town, killing over 48 civilians and injuring several more.
War should be among soldiers, not civilians. To bombard civilians is a clear sign of genocide.
The
airstrike happened at around 8 in the morning, here in the middle of the city. A lot of civilians go through this square. Now many people are dead and injured.
The most recent happened on Friday, hitting a hotel at the heart of the city and killing 10 civilians. Isaias Toshome is the owner of the hotel in Alamata, where devastating airstrike took place.
This is not new in Tigray. The bombardments and atrocities that were happening all around the region are happening in Alamata too. Many civilians have lost their lives. I invested everything I have on this hotel because I thought I had a country. It's not just my hotel, it's also the country's and the people's hotel. We lost so many lives.
On Friday, Tigray External Affairs Office issued a statement on the aerial bombardments of Alamata, saying the act is clear indication of the fact that the regime in Addis Ababa has no respect for international human rights law. According to the statements, there had been 6 rounds of airstrikes in a marketplace in Alamata, in which 28 people were killed and 76 civilians confirmed to be injured until the time of the statement was released. The statement emphasized that a drone attack on a hotel in Alamata had injured several civilians in the previous night. The statement says air bombardments with heavy civilian casualties has been the daily experience of the people of Tigray since November 2020. The office also says these vicious attacks on civilians' residential areas and on other strategic infrastructures, including Takaza hydroelectric power plant, showed that the regime in Addis has no respect for international human rights laws and international public opinions. The office also called upon the international community to assume its responsibility and put pressure on the central government and its international sponsors to refrain from attacking civilian targets and to respect international laws and laws of war. The president for the government of Tigray sent an open letter to 53 heads of state saying the situation in Tigray demands immediate attention from the international community. The open letter also emphasized the destructive role of some countries such as Turkey and the United Arab Emirates have played in exacerbating the conflict. Abel Zagabo has the details.
The president of Tigray sent an open statement on Saturday saying Ethiopia's crisis has been exacerbated by external intervention, indicating that Iran, Turkey, and the UAE have provided financial and military assistance to the regime in Addis Ababa. According to the letter, Ethiopian government and its allies have committed countless atrocities, including the use of hunger and sexual violence as an instrument of war. The president reiterated the long-established position of the government of Tigray that military solution cannot solve essentially political problems. The letter reads that regardless of the readiness of the government of Tigray to resolve the crisis through negotiations, the regime in Addis Ababa is making a peaceful resolution of the conflict unattainable by government-sponsored political polarizations and ethnic fragmentation. The president has also stated that the state of emergency declared in November is just a scapegoat for the mass detention and persecution of Tigrayans in the lack of law enforcement, recalling that in recent weeks hundreds of thousands of Tigrayans have been thrown into concentration camps and others taken to mistrust places to be executed. The president has also expressed that the dire situation in Tigray demands an immediate international response and that he hopes the government of the nations will live up their responsibility by putting the necessary pressure on the government of Ethiopia to cease its genocidal campaign on the people of Tigray.
The U.S. State Department issued a statement on Friday regarding the mass detention, killing, and forced expulsion of Tigrayans from western Tigray by Amhara security forces, stating its grave concern on the matter.
The U.S. State Department called on leaders from Amhara region to denounce violence against civilians and reiterated its call for Eritrea to remove all its forces from Ethiopia. The statement also urged Ethiopian authorities to investigate and hold responsible bodies accountable for the atrocities in western Tigray. The U.S. State Department also called for the cessation of hostilities and immediate end to human rights abuses and violations, negotiations without preconditions, unhindered humanitarian access, and the start to an all-inclusive national dialogue. On Friday, the head for the Bureau of Youth and Sports in Tigray, Gannet Arafa, made a call to international sports organizations to play their part in promoting peace and accountability in Ethiopia. The head for the Bureau also stated that the genocidal conflict had primarily targeted youth in Tigray and other parts of Ethiopia. Aragawi Gabra Mikael has more.
In a press conference held on Friday, the head of Bureau of Youth and Sports in Tigray, Gannet Arafa, called on international sports organizations to play their part in promoting peace in the ongoing conflict in Ethiopia.
As Bureau of Tigray Youth and Sport, we want to call upon the international sports society, the federations, the FIFAs, all the sport community must stand with us, must stop the genocide war which is continuing.
The Bureau head stated that while the international community had on multiple occasions sworn never again after the genocide in Rwanda, it was once again failing the people of Tigray by ignoring the call of millions deliberately being denied food aid and medical supplies.
Why the world is not learning from the Rwandan genocide war? Why? After the Rwandan genocide war, the world has said never again, but still is continuing in Tigray. All crimes are committed in Tigray. Women and children are dying because of starvation. Those who are living with chronic disease, they are dying because of shortage of medicine.
Gannet Arafa also said that Tigrayans are still detained in mass both in western Tigray and other parts of the country only because of their Tigrayan identity.
The property of civilians are looted, especially still continuing in the western part of Tigray, and mass detention and roundup is continuing in Tigray ethnics because of their ethnic belongingness, especially in Addis Ababa and in western part of Tigray.
The Bureau head stated that while the Tigrayan government has repeatedly called for international bodies to act, those bodies are failing to take necessary measures to save the lives of the many in need.
The government of Tigray has been repeatedly informing the international community about the genocidal war against the Tigrayan people, against Tigray, but still it's getting worse. Still no solution is coming from the international community. It couldn't stop the genocide war